Hello and welcome to the next edition of Plan Talk. And this week's really exciting, not least because we're actually talking about some real town planning for a change. So today we have Tom Cardis, who's here to talk about the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation, which is possibly one of the biggest and most exciting developments in West London. There's a couple of bits of housekeeping. First of all, if you have questions that you want to ask, please do ask them in the panel over there, and we'll try and cover all of them at the end. The second is around the setup of this. So it's about a 15-minute presentation followed by about 15 minutes of question and answers. If you want to rewatch any of it, please do so on the YouTube channel afterwards, which is #PlanTalk. So without further ado, Tom, I'm not going to talk much about your background, but I know you've certainly been at the OPDC a while, before which you were at Hammersmith, weren't you?
I was, Peter, yes. So I've actually been working on Old Oak for, I think probably about sort of 7 years now, in totality. So yeah, it's been part of my life, you could say.
We're all feeling old. So anyway, I'm going to switch my camera off and hand over to you, so go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yeah, so I'm just going to sort of take everyone through, really, I suppose, a bit of background to what the Old Oak and Park Royal project is, a bit of background to our role as a Mayoral Development Corporation, and then some of the kind of main issues and challenges we've been kind of grappling with on what is a large-scale, complex regeneration project within a urban setting. So I suppose a bit of background really to why is Old Oak and Park Royal a project. So this map is the proposed route for High Speed 2, which is actually phase 1 of High Speed 2 has now started construction. And phase 1 starts at London Euston and goes up to Birmingham. There's 4 stations as part of phase 1, 2 in Birmingham, Curzon Street, Birmingham Interchange, and 2 in London. And like I said, Euston's one of them, but the other is Old Oak Common. And Old Oak Common is vitally important for High Speed 2 because it provides a connection to Crossrail or the Elizabeth line, and via the Elizabeth line people will be able to get off High Speed 2, get to places like Heathrow and central London. And at the moment the Old Oak area where the station is to be built is an industrial area of land. Obviously the connectivity provided by this new station will dramatically transform access to public transport. You can see here, the Old Oak Common area will be within 10 minutes of Heathrow, 8 minutes of central London, 38 minutes from Birmingham, and it's a vast station that's being built the size of Waterloo, effectively. Like I said, the area today, it's kind of very much industrial area. There are some pockets of residential, and it's surrounded by residential, but the core area that we've been set up to focus on is a mixture of transport, industry, waste uses. You can see sort of in the distance on this map here, the Park Royal Industrial Estate, which actually is London's largest industrial estate, employing about 40,000 people across 2,000 businesses. And you can see just to the left here with the Old Oak Common Station site, which at the moment is some transport depots. We've got our first virtual plan committee next week, and the first item we're considering is the Old Oak Common Station application. So this is just one of their visuals of the station. Like I say, it's the size of Waterloo. It's a vast piece of infrastructure that's being built, providing connections between High Speed 2, Crossrail, and the Great West Main Line. And at the moment, you can see this visual. It shows it's sitting within an area of transport, kind of infrastructure and industrial land. And I suppose our role as a corporation is to bring forward the development that will happen around that. So this is just one of the visuals we produced of what the future could be effectively. We've been set targets within the London plan to deliver across our areas 25,500 homes and 65,000 jobs. So as Peter alluded to, that makes us one of the biggest regeneration areas in London and indeed the country. And the regeneration area crosses 3 borough boundaries, Brent, Ealing and Hammersmith and Fulham. And so winding back to 2015, the Mayor of London felt that to ensure a kind of coordinated approach to the regeneration of this area, it was important to set up a kind of a functional body to lead and coordinate that. And so London's second Mayoral Development Corporation was set up. The first is the London Legacy Development Corporation in East London around the Olympics. We're the second, and as a mayoral development corporation, that means we're now the local planning authority for the area. So we have plan-making, decision-taking powers. We're also a regeneration delivery agent. So we're responsible for coordinating the delivery of land. We have powers for land acquisition, for instance, and infrastructure delivery alongside that. We have, obviously governance procedures that we work to. I think quite interestingly for us planners, we have in our plan committee 4 elected members, so 4 council members, but also 4 independent members as well. So, sort of slightly different, I suppose, from a local planning authority committee. But yeah, it's a proper functional planning authority that we have now for the area. Going to move on to some of the challenges we've been grappling with then. So the first is around sort of delivery and viability, and this chart here just shows actually sort of the context for industrial price rises in our area. So as I showed earlier, the area of our land is industrial, forming warehouses and transport functions. And one of the key issues we've had in recent years has actually been the rapid rise in industrial land values in our area, really causing us quite difficult challenges in terms of bringing forward land, in a coordinated manner, and really sort of incentivizing developers to bring forward their sites. And in the last sort of year or so, that sort of came to a head, I suppose, in relation to one of our sites, which is shown here, which is a site owned by a huge car dealership. I think UK's largest car dealership called Car Giant, who up to about 2017 were looking at bringing forward their site for mixed-use development. But then, as I showed in the previous slide, industrial prices started to shift out. Car Giant had been looking to potentially relocate somewhere else, and they were no longer just able to afford it. And they then informed us they wanted to remain on the current site. So we've had to respond to that and adapt our strategy accordingly. And that's just one example, I suppose. This image here, for instance, shows back in 66, following the fire of London, Christopher Wren's vision for how London could be redesigned, across a kind of coordinated sort of street pattern. This image shows what was built in practice, and I think on these big regeneration projects, you have to recognise that there does need to be an element of flexibility in terms of your approach. So following sort of discussions on viability with Car Giant, for instance, we've changed our tack somewhat, and we're now focusing on bringing forward the land that's mostly in public sector ownership in our area. So this map here shows we've got a lot of public sector land. I think about 75% of our kind of core development areas in public sector ownership, but it's not all within the ownership of one public body. We've got Network Rail, we've got High Speed 2, we've got DfT, Transport for London, the local boroughs all own land, and I suppose our role is ensuring that there's a kind of coordinated approach across those different public sector partners, and all working to one common goal really in terms of how we want to bring forward our various sites. So that's delivery. And one of our other challenges is really meeting our housing and jobs targets. I mentioned we've got targets to deliver 25,500 homes and 65,000 jobs. On the one hand, there's a need obviously for quite significant housing numbers, so challenges about how do we deliver high quality at high density, and certainly parts of our area are within the kind of the hyper density sort of 350 to 600 dwellings per hectare range, comparable to projects like Vauxhall Nine Elms, what's happening around Canary Wharf, for instance, at Mill Harbour. And that comes with its own challenges in terms of, again, viability, creating a quality place, delivering good amenity standards. And then out to the west of our area, we've got kind of Park Royal, which we're looking to retain as industrial. We've got parts of Old Oak we're looking to retain as industrial as well. And we've got a huge pressure to intensify that industrial land. And this is an image actually taken, unsurprisingly, from Hong Kong, showing how they do intensification in Hong Kong. And we're certainly not looking at this scale in our area, but we are having to look at moving from, at the moment, Park Royal is very much kind of one-story sheds. We are starting to see interest now from developers about, stacking things 2-story, 3-story, for instance, and looking at how, we can optimize use of space. And, I'll come on to this, impacts of COVID-19. There's going to be a huge growth we're likely to see in terms of logistics space needs, and trying to manage that appropriately will be quite important. And then sort of, we sort of started, I suppose, at the point where we were sort of separating out housing and industry, but we're moving towards a approach where we're looking much more at co-location. So there are some kind of schemes coming out the ground in London now that are looking to deliver housing, industry, other uses within the same sort of sites. You've got King's Cross here where that's been done vertically. You've got industry at the ground, residential above. You've got to the right a scheme that Seagrow are delivering up in Hayes, which has been separated horizontally. So housing to the left of the site, industry to the right of the site. And where we're sort of headed now with our strategy is looking much more at kind of weaving land uses together. And obviously that again comes with its own issues in terms of protecting the amenity, particularly for residents, and ensuring that industries can function within the hours of operation that they would like to. So there is a difficulty in delivering this form of development, but it's nevertheless, given the landowners we have in the area, the approach that we're now looking to take. Another key challenge for us is placemaking. So on the one hand, we have heritage in the area, so we want to look to protect that and ensure it's enshrined in the new development that comes forward. So we've got things like the Granion Canal to the left, the old Rolls-Royce factory from the 1930s within our core area as well. A lot of our work is looking at kind of early placemaking, what we call early activation. So looking at how we can deliver meanwhile uses, key points of activity, key entrance points into our area. So we've got various bids we've been successful for funding that's looking at delivering public realm enhancements, meanwhile projects to help facilitate that. Also important is engaging with the community. We've been working with Heritage Lottery Fund and Arts Council to run a number of initiatives in our area, tours of the area, and canoe clubs to get people to use the canal more. And we've set up a new time banking platform called Echo, which is about business and community members trading hours between one another. So there's all sorts of interesting initiatives out there about how you can engage communities in the development process. And then our last kind of bucket of challenges is around sort of sustainability. So we're delivering a new comprehensive part of London, and there's opportunity for really innovative approaches to things like how you manage water, energy, waste, for instance, and we're looking to be quite best practice in that regard. Obviously, viability is another challenge there, though. Urban greening, we're setting ourselves a target to be biodiversity positive and deliver 30% of our area as public open space. And again, there's a lot of work we've been doing to understand, how do you optimise green infrastructure provision in a quite urban and dense setting. But the densities we're looking to deliver, there's clear challenges around maintaining amenities. We've been doing a lot of work looking at how do you ensure adequate daylight sunlight into properties, how do you manage urban heat island effects, how do you minimise carbon emissions, and as well as delivering that on new developments, we're also looking at retrofitting onto existing kind of industrial premises in our area. So we've got a big solar project with which we're starting at the moment, which is looking at rolling out photovoltaics across our industrial areas to help meet our energy needs and also shift towards zero carbon over the next sort of few decades. And waste as well is obviously a kind of quite big challenge at density. We're trying to move away from the image on the left to something a bit more like on the right. An example at the top there, for instance, of the NVAC system in Wembley, which is a pneumatic waste suction system. There's lots of innovative technologies now for managing waste and supporting recycling. And just lastly, I suppose there's all those challenges, and then more recently we've had the COVID-19 challenges. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment trying to think about how we can support getting construction going again in our area. Starting to think, the top right image here, about sort of what is the future of office space needs in our area. We had originally envisaged a big new sort of commercial centre, but is that going to be required now, given shift away from kind of office working? Like many local planning authorities in the country, bottom left image, thinking about how can we capture the opportunity to shift towards more sustainable travel modes presented by COVID-19. So a lot of people have been obviously walking, cycling a lot more. How do we run with that and really sort of support that kind of modal shift towards sustainable modes? And then the bottom right image is actually an Ocado factory, quite a smart, innovative Ocado factory. But yeah, I think there's going to be a massive growth in, as I said, in the need for logistics space, and we are protecting quite a lot of areas industrial. There's going to be a lot of pressure for logistics space around. How do we make sure that those sorts of uses function effectively, appropriate in terms of the transport provision? And so a lot of our work at the moment is thinking about sort of, I suppose, that as a massive growth sector in our area and across London indeed. Yes, Peter, that's a quick whiz through, I suppose, some of the kind of key challenges that we're grappling with at the moment.
That's really fascinating. If you stop sharing your screen, you'll be able to see me again. The technology at its finest. That's really useful, actually, and actually I appreciate a very high level, and there's a lot of detail behind every one of those words that hangs around. I think the first, to try and group things that kind of come out of that presentation. So if we would start at the end, the key kind of thinking about what's really affecting and what's driving the change as a result of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is the biggest change that you're having to think about as a result of the current situation? And do you actually think that it's going to only really be a short-term change, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, I think in the very short term, I suppose there is a temporal aspect to this. In the very short term, the immediate things we're focusing on are construction and on transport. So it is about getting construction moving again. We've got a number of sites under construction area which have stopped. Some of them are beginning to start again, but they're lagging behind their program, and it's about how do we support them in getting construction moving again. On the transport side, we in our area at the moment, there's London-wide targets for 80% of journeys to be made by sustainable modes. At the moment, we're below 50%, and obviously during the last few weeks there has been a massive shift towards more sustainable modes, and a lot of councils we're speaking to are looking at how do you sort of, like, say, run with that and capture that. Yeah, so looking at we're looking at new funds that will be made available that will support kind of walking and cycling initiatives in our area, and sort of how do we get those delivered as quickly as possible to lock down, I suppose, that kind of shift towards sustainable modes. But then in the medium term, it's that kind of land use sort of need, I suppose, that's going to be the critical thing, because we're at the start of a 20 or 30 year regeneration project here. We're only about 4 or 5 years in. So we're quite lucky that we haven't kind of committed ourselves and built all of these developments yet, and we can be quite flexible about the land use approach that we take. And I suppose on the one hand, as I said, we know there's a massive growth in need for logistics space at the moment. I think there's going to be a shift towards recognising the need for internal space standards in housing. So it might be that more space needs to be given over to housing. Open space obviously has been a really critical requirement and need for people during the COVID-19 outbreak, so making sure we're delivering good quality access to open space. And then on the other hand, I think the shift towards internet sort of shopping, etc., means that the retail sector is potentially going to struggle over the next few years. Do we need to deliver as much in the way of retail uses? And likewise, like I said, office space, is there going to be a need for 50,000 new office jobs in our area?
But that also brings on kind of the logical big question, which is, given that there's a likely recession ahead, is there a real likelihood of government still funding at HS2?
So obviously High Speed 2 phase 1 was given notice to proceed back in February, March time. Now obviously we're in unprecedented times here, and it's we're going to have to obviously sort of wait and see what decisions government makes. But the murmurings we hear are that unlike previous recessions, government's committed to investing to get us out of that recession, and big infrastructure projects will be quite critical. Now you could argue that will there be a need for high speed 2 if people are making less long journeys, but what we've been told is there's an existing rail capacity issue which is partly about kind of passenger commuter trains, but it's also partly about freight movements as well. So and I think given the kind of shift towards, like I say, internet shopping and logistics, there's going to be a growing need for more capacity for freight on our railways. So the kind of the business case really for high speed 2 in terms of dealing with current capacity issue is still very much there. We'll have to wait and see, I suppose, over the next sort of few months what government decisions are made around the big infrastructure projects we have in the country. But certainly to date, in terms of our engagement with DfT, High Speed 2, they're confident the project still has support from government and will go ahead.
Great. Which I do remember it's something that we worked on slightly together and slightly separated at the start, was the relationship between the local planning authorities and the OPDC as the planning authority. Obviously I've moved a long way away from that, and so have you to some extent, but how's that kind of panned out in reality? What's the relationship like now as different local planning authorities have different responsibilities in the area?
Yeah, so I think actually as the years have gone on, the relationships become easier. I think at the start there was, it's fair to say, a fair degree of apprehension from the boroughs. You know, we were taking away planning authorities from the boroughs. They were still responsible for all other services, including, you know, things like transport, for instance, transport and highways. And there was felt to be a kind of potential friction, I suppose, between, you know, what we were doing as planning authority, what they had to still do, you know, in terms of kind of council services outside of planning. But actually, as time's gone on, you know, we've been able to work through those kind of concerns, I suppose, and come up with kind of protocols and arrangements which ensure that, you know, we're still keeping them abreast of what we're doing as planning authority, and, you know, we're also engaged with other council departments to make sure that we're all, you know, working as one, I suppose, in our area. And I mean, I'll probably speak on their behalf to a certain degree, but I think certainly, you know, they now seem to recognise benefit in there being a corporation and having the bandwidth actually to help support some of the initiatives that the council are doing. So, you know, be it public realm enhancement projects, highways projects, we're sort of a body that's, you know, particularly focused on our area, and we are able to kind of, you know, deploy ourselves to help support their initiatives that they're looking to bring forward in our area.
And has there been competing politics from that as a result? I know that they're on your decision-making board, or they have representation on your decision-making board, but has that caused any friction, or has it been as smooth going as it could be?
Yeah, there's been, I suppose, now and again there's been sort of differences of opinion, but we've always kind of managed to find an amicable solution in the end. So I suppose, you know, one example of that has been our affordable housing tenure split for our local plan, where given, again, coming back to the viability conundrum, we've had to put forward a tenure split weighted towards intermediate housing as opposed to social rent housing. The boroughs quite rightly identify that there's a massive need for social housing in the area, and so, you know, issues such as that have been discussion points at our board and planning committee meetings. And yeah, you know, I think ultimately each party recognises each other's position, and we've come through that. And, you know, there's been, say, some kind of approaches or protocols we've had to put in place to get things agreed, but there's always been a kind of, you know, agreement in the end on those differences.
There must have been a really kind of heartbreaking, heart-sinking moment the day Car Giant announced that they were planning to stay on site. I think certainly according to the advertisement when I went to buy my car, was they the biggest car sales location in Europe. But the question is kind of how you're dealing with that challenge now, because they fall slap in the middle of the site, don't they?
Yeah. So yeah, and it was obviously sort of, you know, we'd submitted our local plan, we had our examination hearings, and it was, I'd say, you know, the lion's share of the hearings were focused on that issue. But I think we come the other side of that now, and, you know, we recognise the Car Giant actually, you know, the market has moved so much on industrial prices that they can't relocate and they want to stay. And now we're working to support them with them remaining there, and they've got some ambitious plans to grow their business. So coming back to that industrial intensification kind of angle I talked about earlier, they wanted to intensify their site. They want to shift towards being London's kind of main centre for electric car sales. So, you know, there's a zero carbon angle to it as well. And so we're looking to now support them in intensifying their site. So as part of our kind of next stage of the local plan, we'll be looking to reinstate industrial designations for their site to give them that certainty to allow them to invest in, you know, growing their business. And then obviously by doing that, we have lost some housing capacity from the site that we had previously identified. So we're looking at how we can recalibrate land uses elsewhere to kind of claw back some of the housing that we've lost, and still, you know, work towards those kind of London plan targets that we need to meet for 25,500 homes.
So that leads on to the next big area that's really logical, is around the co-location challenge. What do you see the biggest co-location challenges are, and kind of from that, how are you making sure that they're not dealing with the issues now, but dealing with the issues that we don't yet know are going to be issues in 15 years' time with industry?
Yeah. So, I mean, the clear obvious issue is how do you ensure that when you are either stacking on top or adjacent industrial and residential uses, that the residents aren't being impacted by the noise, air quality concerns being caused by the industrial uses, and vice versa? How can you ensure that the industry uses feel comfortable operating at the hours they need to without getting all sorts of complaints from residents? And when we've been talking to kind of landowners in our area and the industrial development industry, their preference has been very much to kind of separate things. So if you've got a site, you just deliver one part for industry, one part for housing, and then there's mitigation measures, and you can kind of deal with the issue that way. Vertically stacking things is much more challenging, and it's quite novel as well. We've been doing some work, looking with other local authorities across London at where are there examples where that's been done. There's not that many of them. There's a few out in East London. I mentioned the one in King's Cross. So it's a bit kind of novel and new, and it's sort of we're testing new waters with that. But there's a few schemes being built at the moment. We actually got some people from Belgium come over and present sort of what they're doing in Brussels around it, and they've got a few schemes coming out of the ground. So in the next sort of 2 or 3 years, there'll be a lot more knowledge of how it works, and I suppose some lessons learned from that. But yeah, it's at the moment, I think we're taking the approach generally of trying to separate things. So if you've got a site, you do the housing one bit, the industrial on the other bit, rather than stacking things vertically, just because that is a bit more of an unknown quantity at this stage.
Yes, but I suppose the question then becomes around, because it will essentially have the same effect as SIL, doesn't it, in the future? It being strategic, it will be wanting to protect space wherever it's stacked. And how do we protect that to make sure it's future-proofed in respect to industries we don't yet know about?
Yeah, I mean, in the local plan itself, it's once a building's been delivered for industrial, we have a target from the mayor to ensure no net loss of industrial space in our area. So we have quite stringent policies to protect what's being built and what's there now, to be honest, so that we're not getting into a situation, I suppose, where that important industrial function for London's being gradually eroded away and lost.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. We're rapidly running out of time, but I think we've got time for probably 2 more questions. The first one is about the density of development that you're going to have to deliver at. If there was one thing that you could pick out that's going to protect the quality of life of residents that you're trying to achieve that's different to other schemes across the country, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think I mean, the densities we're delivering, a lot of people aren't going to have access to much in the way of private amenity space. So it's, as I see it, the critical thing to get right, therefore, is to deliver really good quality public open space and fulfilling, within that public open space, a variety of functions. So we've been doing quite a lot of detailed work to inform what's going to become a future supplementary planning document, which we're calling a Public Realm and Green Infrastructure SPD, which is going to be sort of, exploring a lot more kind of how do you deliver really high quality open spaces, delivering the right quantum of space. So as I said, we've got a target in our local plan to deliver 30% of our land areas as public open space, which is quite innovative. There's not many authorities that set quite an ambitious target like that, but then it's about ensuring that those spaces are delivering on the kind of the variety of functions that they need to. And we've been working with London Wildlife Trust, for instance, looking at things like biodiversity. We've been working with the GLA and other bodies looking at things like play space and kind of making sure that we're best practice in the types of play space we deliver. But it's that intensity of use, I suppose, as well, that we've got sort of probably 60,000 people living and working in our area in future. Even with 30% open space, you need to think about resilience of design and things of that sort. So we've started the process now of, like I say, developing this supplementary planning document, which is going to provide some real clear parameters for developers to work to for delivering suitable open space for what we need in future. And I suppose the climate resilience sort of angle to that as well, thinking about that actually we're probably designing spaces that will be operating in quite a different climate potentially in 50 years time to what we doing now. So, you know, picking species and materials that are conscious of that.
No, that's really, really interesting, actually. I look forward to reading that as well.
It's got some nice pictures in it.
And then the final question, which is the one we're asking all of our speakers, which is obviously we're going to go into some economically challenging times now. We're all getting a bit long in the tooth in that we've been through economically challenging times before. What advice would you give anyone coming into the planning industry now about what to do in the times ahead and hopefully hold the faith?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, you know, sometimes it's actually quite exciting to come out of or go through an economic recession and come out the other side of it, because you do see a lot of change actually in the system. Sometimes you kind of get to, you know, a point where you think, oh, the whole planning system's stagnated, nothing's really happened, and then something comes along and disrupts it. And obviously recessions, they have a lot of downsides, but they are a bit of a phoenix from the ashes, I suppose, to a certain degree as well, that they do sort of drive different ways of doing things and, you know, different approaches to development. So I think we're in this recession in particular, well, and the COVID-19 crisis is driving all sorts of, you know, new innovations, not least, you know, the kind of webinar we're having now, but in the planning sort of sphere, there's going to be, you know, all sorts of new innovative ideas coming out, and I think that's quite exciting, really. So, you know, as a young planner, I'm sure, you know, there's what's happened over the last 20-30 years, which you can obviously study and learn, but actually what's really interesting is what is going to happen in the next 20 or 30 years. And I'm sure we've got, you know, a lot of excitement to come in terms of, you know, new approaches to development and new approaches to planning.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. Thank you. So thank you so much for taking the time to prepare and present today. It's really appreciated, and I know it will have certainly been appreciated by everyone that's dialed in to view it. This will appear hopefully over the next 24 hours on our plantalk channel on YouTube, which the RTPI and the GLA are sharing the resource for. So it's really only turns to me to say thank you to Lucy and Natalie for making all of the magic happen, and thank you to you, Tom, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Yep, see you.